It's NFL season. Matt Landis, LasVegasCris, and Scott Kellen will break down the games live every Tuesday and Friday on our BetUS NFL YouTube channel. Subscribe, hit that bell now, and never miss a show. BetUS, where the game begins.
Hi, welcome to BetUS NFL Show. After recapping last week's ups and downs, our NFL guys are looking forward for Week 6 frontline that will have a nice roster of games, including another London game. The Miami Dolphins and Jacksonville Jaguars will face off in the NFL International Series. But the action kicks off on Thursday Night Football when quarterback Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will face the Philadelphia Eagles. On Monday night, the Buffalo Bills will meet the Tennessee Titans in primetime. Matt Landis, LasVegasCris, and Scott Kellen will be in shortly to go over early lines, their best bets, and picks for Week 6 of NFL.
NFL Week 6 coming in hot. Thanks to our live audience for bearing with a slight delay as we overcame some technical difficulties, but we're here with you guys to take an early look at some edges on the Week 6 board. And one of the big factors here, Chris, it's our first time this season with bye weeks in play. Obviously, the Falcons and Jets after playing in London last week, plus the Saints and the 49ers. So what's your approach when we're working with a shorter board?
Oh, I complain because I want more games the merrier, quite frankly. So haven't started off as well as I would like. So I want more games in action. And there's not enough games. I want more games.
Scott, is it the same way for you? Do you just try to, still just play, where there's value, and that means a shorter board could mean less volume?
Yeah, you deal with what you got, right? But to Chris's point, hey, the more games you got, the more opportunities in a whole variety of different ways. So it just shortens those opportunities more than anything.
Yeah, well, throughout the course of this episode, we'll get to some good opportunities that we can try to work toward on this Week 6 board. And before we dig in, a friendly reminder to our live audience joining us on YouTube, we'd like to make this a Q&A, so feel free to jump in that chat, ask us any questions, and also feel free to let us know what you think about our takes over the course of this episode. And last but not least, before we kick things off, you can sign up today at BetUS using the promo code NFL2021 to collect your 125% sign-up bonus. And for more information on that offer, check out the link below this video. And guys, as we dig in to our show, we're going to get into some bets from last week. But first, we can pull up a full-screen graphic with our records updated after the Week 5 action finished up last night, with Scott the Raven somehow coming through on a teaser that we had last week. So that kept our records in the shape that they're looking right now. Chris to date, 13-11. I'm 9-8. And Scott, the leader of the pack, 11-5 off another strong showing this past week. Collectively, we're looking at 33-24, and we'll look to keep it rolling as we get deeper into Week 6. But first, let's take a look at some of our action last week and see what we can maybe apply moving forward from those Week 5 results. We had a consensus play on the Browns. Scott, you and I had them in a teaser. Chris, you have the Browns +2. So we got different outcomes over those different approaches to the Browns exposure. But Scott, like I said earlier, the Ravens coming through last night, somehow giving meaning to that Browns cover of the teaser leg on Sunday against the Chargers.
Hey, that's sometimes why you tease it, right? It was a line under 3, so sometimes you don't always feel comfortable with that. Although I agreed with Chris's pick taking the line, but you build in a few extra points, and sometimes like that. And both games, right? They both came in, and you needed the teaser on both of them to get the cover. So,
oh, you guys don't know what you're missing by just betting that straight up. I have a lifetime story to tell of watching the team I bet on actually carry the opponent into the end zone. That's how I lost. So, jeez.
Yeah, that was one for the ages for sure. And I'll go ahead to that end and give the entertainment value of this one an A+. But when it comes to the confidence and any meaningful takeaways from that end game, I think I'm at an F. And Chris, in your case, the outcome was an F as well, given what it did to your Browns +2.
Yeah, it was difficult watching that. It seems like I was on the wrong end of blown lead. So, that's just the way it happens. You got to take the good with the bad, and you can't get down in the dumps about it. You got to take it in stride. I had 4 games that I bet this week that I essentially call coin flips or games that could go either way. And I actually ended up on the wrong side of all 4 of them. So last year I seemed to be on the right side of those. So it all evens out.
Yeah, well, another one of those coin flips from last week was the Bengals hosting the Packers. Scott, did you have one more thing to add on that Chargers-Browns game before we move on to that one?
Yeah, I was just going to say on it, just talking through this to kind of remind me how we all have selective memory, and that we had the teaser and we saw that play. And at the time, I'm like, they should have just taken a knee to set the field goal up to not really allow them the opportunity to push him in. But Chris got burned on it, if you will, because they pushed him in there. That's a forgotten memory for me because we won it as a teaser. And Chris obviously remembers it very well. So I'm just thinking, hearing it, like we all have selective memory in different ways about how we should have won, lost, did lose, and it's just kind of interesting to note that it's just important to keep it in the right frame of mind, whether you won or lost, and remember really what happened, not what happened that impacted your result necessarily.
Yeah, well, when it comes to that Bengals-Packers game, I think that the result you could remember, this one being a push, at times you could have argued the Bengals should have easily covered. At other times it looked like the Packers could have covered pretty comfortably. So, netting out with that push, Scott, what do you make of the result that we saw Sunday in Cincinnati?
Well, it's interesting. I'm looking at the success rates. Cincinnati dominated this game from a success rate standpoint. They were successful about 54% of the time to about 41% for Green Bay, which is alarming. But the flip side is Green Bay averaged 7.4 yards a play, Cincinnati 5.6. Now, the Packers did have a long run in there, which kind of skewed their rushing numbers. Really, if you take that run out, they averaged 6 yards a run with it in, the 57-yard run by Aaron Jones. It's actually 3.6 yards per rush after that. That's kind of what success rates will do. It'll take some of that stuff out. But you have to also account for big plays. Big plays are big chunk plays, and they do mean something. So, they both mean something, but it's just interesting. A game that Green Bay won by 3, and like you said, either side could have won, and all these missed field goals. From a success rate standpoint, though, it really looked completely different from a Cincinnati standpoint.
Yeah, and Chris, Scott touched on a lot of missed field goals. At a certain point, it just felt like a high-stakes game of Russian roulette.
It's just brutal, and I think that segues into one of the topics I wanted to talk about. 14 missed field goals, 13 missed extra points, all-time record for missed extra points in a week. And I bring this up not because it's unusual, because I think it's going to change the way we start handicapping these games, because it's a cause and effect type situation. The more these teams are missing these kicks, the more they're going to start thinking about 2-point conversions and going for it on 4th down. I mean, I looked up the stats for made PATs. 11 teams are at 90% or lower. You think these PATs are nearly automatic. More than a third of the league are making, less than 90% of their PATs. What about field goals? 20 teams are at 90% or lower, and 11 teams are at 80% or lower in field goal success rate. These are big numbers. What do you guys think?
Yeah, one of my first thoughts, especially, building on that Chargers-Browns game we talked about, is we get, perhaps more younger, smarter coaches in the league who understand these numbers. We might see teams going for it more. I think of, Brandon Staley. How many times has he gone for it on 4th down this year? He really seems to understand when to keep the ball. I think of a lot of primetime games involving a team like the Chargers. Maybe look at punts to go under, because the punts prop that we see at a lot of books in primetime games is probably using a model that does not take into account some of these coaches' inclination to go for it on 4th down when that's the right move to make. And I know at BetUS, one of my favorite props to play for a few games every week, shortest touchdown over under 1.5 yards. And with some of these teams, instead of settling for, a 53-yard field goal attempt on 4th and 1, if they just go for it and keep that drive alive, that gives them a much better chance to get down to the goal line. So this could have a lot of implications in the props market. And Scott, I'd be curious for your take as to what this could also mean from a total standpoint.
Well, it's hard to say, and I'm going to look into this a little bit more, Matt, and maybe we'll have more to say on Friday with it too. But you can see this thing going both ways in terms of, they go for it but don't get it. well, then they don't get the field goal opportunity. They go for it and get it. And of course, they could, like you said, they could score a touchdown on this. It can impact both ways. And it's just interesting. I was at a conference years ago. This was right when Cleveland was just starting to kind of introduce, if you will, analytics to football, really, because we'd always seen it in baseball. And there was a gentleman there speaking at the conference from a very well-respected kind of analytics website, if you will. And I asked him what he thought about Cleveland getting into this from the NFL. And he made a very interesting statement at the time. He said he had a buddy who was a coach or a consultant for an NFL team. He said not a very good NFL team, but they were trying to get their coach to go for it more often on 4th and 1 and whatnot. And the coach responded to him saying, if you guarantee my contract for the next 3 years, I'll be more inclined to go for it. He didn't want to go for it at the time because he was worried about losing his job and then a perception that he was an idiot and he wouldn't get hired somewhere else. That's starting to change, obviously, now. And as we see more coaches become successful, more people will go for it. And the last point on this is you have to kind of know what you're doing. So you get people that go for it, you feel sometimes, that just feel they should go for it, but they don't really have the setup to properly go for it. So, you get coaches who maybe aren't as well set up to really going for it because they feel it's now the thing to do. And that has an impact as well. So, I mean, this thing can be all over the board in terms of affecting, impacting things positively, negatively.
Well, yeah, I love that anecdote, Scott, because when you talk about coaches also prioritizing job security, I mean, that's human nature. So no matter what the numbers say, people are going to do that at a certain point. And it would be nice if front offices, maybe some do this behind the scenes, but just be more upfront about committing to the process over the result and any small sample sizes. And you talk about, the overall process behind this dynamic. Chris, I'll kick it back to you for your thought on this. I think of a stat like success rate that's very common in the analytics community right now. I think, Scott, you might have mentioned that just a few minutes ago at the top of this show, if I'm not mistaken. And third down is deemed as a successful play only if it results in a first down. And for a lot of teams, if you've got 3rd and 10 and you get 8 yards and that sets you up for a very makeable 4th and 2, that should probably be considered a successful play. So even with some of these analytics, we might need to retool things. And Chris, to that end, how does this whole dynamic affect your handicapping process?
Well, you're exactly right. It's good. There's going to be a domino effect of what the stats actually tell us. And that's why it's so important not to rely on just a couple of stats. And you have to look at the domino effect on all the other stats and how they affect it, because you brought up a perfect point. I have no choice but to consider new situations. You had the Lions go down there and Campbell goes for 2 to win the game. He's got nothing to lose. There's other coaches that are stepping into the light and doing similar stuff. You have to be on the ball and you have to know which coaches are willing to do this and which coaches are not. And here's the one actionable thing I'm going to offer. I haven't heard this anywhere, but I think there's huge value in this. And that is, take a look at the Chargers. They're going for it on 3rd and 7 or 4th and 7 from their own 27. I think something like that. And they're just going to go for it. They have the confidence. What happens when you have a coach that doesn't care how much he loses by? I mean, and he shouldn't. I mean, I don't understand why more coaches, hey, if we're not going to win the game, we might as well just keep on going. Why are they punting? There's going to be more coaches that stop punting, and they're going to keep going for it. And what's the actionable thing that you can take away from it? Take a look at the alternate lines. Instead of, if you want to bet against San Diego or you want to bet against a team that is doing this type of stuff, go ahead and get some big plus money, because if they lose, they might lose by a chunk. And you might get a nice payday on the alternate lines, and they're not going to be adjusted. They're going to be just tied to the metric values instead of the cerebral aspect of who's coaching the game and what they're likely to do.
Yeah, and Chris, when you talk about playing the alternate lines, I think of the notion of trying to get in play on the possibility of added variance, which is very much a factor when we see these kinds of decisions. And to that end, I remember this time last week when we were recording our Tuesday show, you had a bet on the Rams -2 on Thursday night, and that covered for you, even regardless of that last-minute field goal that doomed Seattle teaser backers. You were comfortable with the Rams at that stage, but there were a few points throughout the course of that game when it looked like numbers like 2 or 5 were very much in play as outcomes. I mean, this week we saw a lot of people teased Denver up to +7.5. Denver lost by 8. Minnesota, depending on when you tease them, maybe you won with -1.5, you lost with -2.5. So when it comes to the alternate lines, also something to consider for bets like teasers. Are there any other options on the betting menu that either of you guys think might need some reconsideration, especially when coaches that we know to be more aggressive could get, a bigger track record with these types of decisions?
I think it's important to kind of screw around with them a little bit and familiarize yourself with it. There's no set formula, so to speak, that you're going to easily memorize other than basically getting familiarity with ballpark what they are. Now, there are websites you can go and you can look up the values of these things and you can plunk in, okay, the main line is this and the alternate line is this, or you punch in the different values and they tell you exactly where the line should be and whether you have value or not. And my point on the alternate lines with the Chargers, those programs are not going to reflect the true value because they don't care. They're either going to go for the win or they're going to they're going to die trying.
I'll add in, a couple of those, Matt. You see pretty common how many field goals are going to be made in the game, 3.5. Well, that obviously can get adjusted. The longest field goal, for the longest time is 45.5, then 46.5 yards. It seems to keep getting longer and longer. But now you add in a Charger team who maybe won't go for field goals that often, especially when they're, that much further out. All that stuff can come into play. I'll give you another example. I think this was a Indianapolis-Pittsburgh game 3-4 years ago. The first quarter total was 7.5. And my buddy took the over first quarter because he said if Pittsburgh scores, they're very inclined to go for 2 points. I think at the time they were going for the 2-point conversion on their first score very often. And sure enough, they did. They got it. And they ended up scoring that was a game they blew out Indianapolis by 40 points. And they scored a whole bunch in the first quarter. But he kind of used that knowing that they would go for 2, that first quarter total of 7.5 points wasn't a normal 7.5 points because Pittsburgh was playing and it had a different impact the way they would run their offense.
Yeah, I think there's so much to keep in mind here for betting strategy moving forward. I think this might be one of the best segments we've done on a Tuesday show yet this season. Great stuff by both of you.
Jacksonville hasn't even made a field goal this year, according to what I'm looking at. Is that possible? Jacksonville has.
Well, I know Josh Lambeau's been pretty poor. I'd have to look it up to know that, but.
New Orleans is at 25% conversion. Seattle's at 60%. Cincinnati 62%. San Francisco 66%. I mean, it's ridiculous.
I'll throw one other thing in there too, just to try to oversimplify this on a slightly different example, but it all applies. And just bear with me with my numbers here, which aren't exactly correct. But if the 2-point conversion is 50% successful, it's not right necessarily to say that every team should go for 2 points because therefore you're 50% successful, or let's say it was 52% successful. Because how does it get to a 50% success rate? And again, I'm exaggerating the point here, but some teams are 40, some are 60. Some teams are much more equipped to get close to that 50 plus and vice versa. So that's the other thing you kind of want to know is, okay, yeah, teams might start going for it on 4th and 3, 4th and 5 or whatever. Are they capable of actually pulling that off? That's a whole other animal in this whole conversation that I think you have to be aware of as well.
Yeah, the Twitter metric police drive me nuts because they're even arguing amongst themselves and they're off quite a bit between each other, lecturing everybody else. Oh, well, they're dumbasses for not doing this. It's all, it depends on the personnel. You don't know if somebody's injured. There's a lot of different storylines that are not factored in before people get ridiculed for not following metrics.
Exactly.
Well, to that point, I think we're in a good place to get into our On the Move segment because our riser this week is the Chargers. And I mean, Scott, you kind of touched on it. If you've got a coach like Staley, a quarterback like Justin Herbert, an offensive line that's vastly improved, a lot of skill position weapons. I mean, when they went for it on 4th and 2 deep in their own territory against the Browns in the third quarter Sunday, they even just ran a draw play with a running back like Austin Eckler. So if you've got the right pieces, you can make that work. And it sounds like that's probably one of the bigger reasons, Chris, that you nominated the Chargers as a team on the move up this week.
Yeah, on my model, the Chargers gained the most, for obvious reasons. But they're not a complete team. They've got some holes. They've got to build some stuff up. But it doesn't mean I'm jumping behind them and betting them blindly by any means. It's just that they're on the move up in relation to other teams that are on their way down. So take it for what it's worth, from my viewpoint there.
Scott, beyond everything we've already discussed, is there anything else that has you more bullish on the Chargers right now than you were before Sunday's game?
No, not really. I mean, just the fact that at least they seem to have a coach that understands the game and where to maximize their opportunities. I think that's the biggest thing. And like Chris said, they've got some deficiencies as well. And but they at least seem to have a clue. And I think that's important going forward. And we know they've got talent as well.
Yeah, well, on the flip side of the Chargers on the move up, we can stay in the AFC West, and our faller this week, the Las Vegas Raiders, obviously a pretty clear reason there when it comes to what's going on with their coaching situation. And Chris, I'll come to you first here, since you're the guy with Las Vegas in your name here. When it comes to the loss of John Gruden, especially focusing on its impact for us as bettors, what do you make of the coaching change at this stage of the season for the Raiders? And I just must add one more thing. Condolences to any of our friends who had invested in Urban Meyer to be the first coach fired, because this is certainly a pretty big bombshell out of left field.
Yeah, I think it's obvious looking at it in retrospect. We now understand why they just laid a turd sandwich on the field last week, because it was just a pitiful display. And I look for this to be actually a benefit to the team. I think the spirit must have been out. They were just lackadaisical, and there was no excuse for their performance against the Bears. So I look for them to perform better. They were my largest drop metrically last week, but they're still 3-2. They have a lot to play for. You have pros that want to earn a living in the future. They're not going to just sit there and lay down and do nothing. They have stuff to play for. So most of their team is intact. I think they're just going to be happy to be able to move on and not have to have this cloud hanging over their head.
Yeah, Scott, building on Chris's point, one narrative we hear a bit this time every year, and there can be plenty of merit to it, would be, the notion of the dead cat bounce when a team gets a new head coach. But in the Raiders case, I know that John Gruden was also responsible for a lot of the best things they did with play design for their offense. So where do you net out when it comes to losing a pretty bright offensive mind versus also moving on from somebody who seemed to be, a pretty poor presence in the locker room, especially in these most recent couple weeks?
Yeah, I think it's hard to tell, because normally when a coach gets fired, it's because the team's not playing well. A lot of times they'll do it in a bye week, so you got a little bit extra time to prepare. Well, none of that's happening here. Gruden, I don't think Gruden was a great coach. So, they're not losing something it's not like Bill Belichick got fired for some emails and stuff, right? So they don't lose anything there necessarily. What we don't know is really what was the mood in the locker room, and not to rehash the details of all the emails, but the emails that were played out, there was different people in that locker room that could be offended by that for a lot of different reasons, right? So you don't know how the team was impacting. Here in Vegas, I was watching, maybe it was on SportsCenter, but they were talking to the beat writer who had reached out to a lot of the players and asked, their opinions last night, and he hadn't heard back from any of them. He was kind of saying, it's obviously a shock in some way, shape, or form, but look, if this is a relief to that locker room, then, it could have some positive impacts. I think the one thing Chris hit on that is definitely, it was a cloud over that locker room for sure, right? So we get rid of that, but it's hard to say. And I had this team, kind of rated slightly below average before that game even, and this kind of just supported that. So I don't know what we're going to get out of it. If that locker room was kind of hating everything that was going on, maybe we get a little bit of a bounce back initially and maybe long-term as well. And I'll say this, the last thing on this is people always ask, hey, do you think this guy is going to be a good coach? It comes down to how good of a leader is this guy boy, you got offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators. Is the guy a good leader in the locker room? If he is, you could see a real positive bounce from that as well.
Yeah, and Chris, I'd like to come back to you for one more thought in a moment. I'd first feel compelled to note that it was 8 days ago that you and I had our money on the Raiders. They were 3-0, taking on the Chargers in what might as well have been a home game for the Raiders in that Monday night setting at SoFi Stadium. It's been quite the precipitous fall over the past week and change. And I understand that your metrics still have the Raiders offense pretty high, but with Gruden departing, is this an area where you might be open to making a quicker adjustment than you would under more normal circumstances?
You know what? You just have to sit and watch and see what happens. I don't get a predisposition to do anything. You just have to react on the spot. Just like I was, hey, Buffalo, show me that you're good. Last week I was all over Buffalo like a bad rash. So you just have to pivot when you have to pivot.
Yeah, well, on that note, seeing what happens with these teams moving forward, let's take an early look at Week 6 lines, courtesy of BetUS. Again, this is our first week of the season with buys, so a slightly shorter board than usual. And Chris, I think we can go ahead and kick things off now with where you see these lines moving over the course of the next few days.
Yeah, I just try to run through these lines as quickly as possible. If people are trying to, decide when to bet a game, this is my best guess on what the timing of that's going to be. So first off, Tampa Bay, I don't think that goes any higher, and it quite probably could get bet down. I think we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the Thursday game. Miami's a tough read because I think it would be going down, but it looks like Tua is questionable now. So if they announce him in, then that's going to go up. So you just have to be careful there. Indianapolis saw its peak at 10, and it's not going to go back up there, I don't think. I doubt if it hits 7, but it's possible. It probably doesn't. Green Bay, they were favored by 3 last week on the road against Chicago or Cincinnati. They're in the same situation against Chicago. Why are they 4.5? I see that line going down, although I hear people want to bet it up. We'll have to see. Kansas City is a strong 7 now for some reason. I don't understand why. I think it'll get bet back down. Might be some goofy stuff going on with that. Minnesota is now the favorite, but if McCaffrey's announced in, I don't see any way that Carolina doesn't become the favorite. So something to consider there. Baltimore is a 3 now. It's going to weaken, and it might even hit a 2.5. There's a lot of support for the Chargers. Cincinnati at Detroit, that's a really tough read. It's 3.5 now. I don't think it's going to go any higher. I think it's going to try to ping pong around in that area. Just pay attention. Denver hit 4, and I think that's going to be its ceiling. So I think I don't know whether it goes back down to 3, but it could. But I think 4 was the ceiling on that. And Dallas probably saw its ceiling at 4.5. It's 4 now, and I think it'll probably get bet down. Pittsburgh, I think there's a lot of people waiting for a 6 that may never come. It may well be peaked now, but people are hoping it hits 6. And Buffalo is at 5.5. 6s are starting to show. I think that it quite possibly can just keep on going. And who knows, maybe it'll get some public dog support Monday night.
Yeah, well done with that thorough run through and pretty efficient time. And Scott, another factor every week as far as line movement goes, injuries, any news that we get, as we move closer to kickoff can have a pretty big impact. So what do you make of some of the bigger injuries this week as it pertains to some of that line movement that Chris just touched on?
Yeah, I mean, the ones that I would be paying attention to, the Giants, we've got obviously Saquon Barkley, low ankle sprain, possibly could play. Daniel Jones, concussion. And then the wide receiver corp, there's a cluster of injuries there. Galladay got hurt last week. They were already missing Shepard and Slayton. You start to add up, if Barkley, Jones, Galladay, Sterling, Shepard, if all those guys are out, that's maybe a 6-point adjustment on the Giants right there when you start to factor in all those guys. We know Russell Wilson's out. Depending on what you get from Geno Smith, I think and I'd be interested to see what you guys think on this one, but I think that's a 5 to 7-point adjustment with Russell Wilson out at the quarterback position. Levante David, linebacker for Tampa Bay, out. The Chargers lost their guard, Ode Abushi. Remember, they're also playing without their right tackle, Brian Blaga, so that bears watching. And Cleveland, they went in that game last week with a whole bunch of questionable people. Denzel Ward got hurt. MJ Stewart got hurt. Greedy Williams. This is all in their secondary. So they have a cluster of injuries there. We don't know if they'll all play, not play this week, but that bears watching on their secondary, especially taking on a Cardinal team that obviously will want to throw the ball a little bit as well. And one that's kind of under the radar, and they're on a bye. They're playing this week. Jacksonville lost their center, Brandon Linder. He's a very, very good center for them. That one bears watching as well.
I forgot. I skipped two games by mistake because Cincy and Cleveland looked alike. But the Rams are 11.5, 11. Again, that's all injury related, and it's going to depend on who plays and who doesn't play. But as it sits now, that's a pretty strong line. And the Cleveland game, I didn't discuss that one, did I?
I had a question about it, so
yeah.
Go ahead.
I think it's kind of in no man's land because people want to bet Arizona and they want to wait till it hits 3, and people want to bet Cleveland and they want to lay a 2.5. So it's kind of in that in between stage. It's going to get action both ways depending on which direction flinches first. So, but that should be the area that it sits in.
Yeah,
it's going to go to a solid 3. It will get to a solid 3 somehow, I think.
Yeah, it looks like it's trending that way. And I know there's the saying, you are what your record says you are. In this case, with the undefeated Cardinals taking on a Browns team that's now lost multiple games, that could challenge the strength of the notion of your record, kind of being the be-all, end-all, if you will, especially with some of those secondary injuries that Scott touched on. So, Chris, you still think this is going to go to a solid 3, even though Arizona's 5-0 and the Browns secondary might be a little bit shorthanded on Sunday?
Yeah, I think Cleveland's got a lot of support. Arizona off a weak performance last week, which I kind of favor them a little bit for that. You kind of like to grab a team after a soft performance. But there's some cracks in the armor with Arizona that's being publicized, some inconsistencies with their overall efficiency. So whereas Cleveland is more consistent and more understood and considered more dependable, and they should be in a nasty mood playing at home.
Gotcha. One more game I wanted to get your thought on. You kind of touched on being surprised where this line is right now. The Chiefs now a juicy -7 traveling to Washington. And I think to answer some of your confusion as to why the Chiefs might be getting support, it seems like it's week after week at this point of a crazy number of turnovers. They were -4 in turnovers again on Sunday night against Buffalo. And at some point, you have to wonder if it's a feature as opposed to a bug. I mean, this defense just not doing its part to really force any turnovers. At the same time, some of the fumbles on kickoffs and handoffs without anything too crazy going on just seems like it might be unsustainable. So what do you make of the Chiefs as it pertains to both their turnover luck or lack thereof so far this season, as well as the fact that for their defense, this could finally be a step down in class after they've perhaps taken on the best 4 offenses outside of their own and the entire AFC over the first 5 weeks of the season?
Well, their defense is epically bad and horrible. Let me put this in perspective for you. The very best season of NFL football ever played, offensively, 2000 Rams. They averaged 7.0 yards per play. How bad is the Kansas City defense? They're giving up 7.1 per play. So it's at a level we've never seen before. But as you mentioned, Matt, their schedule's been tough. So we're going to see those numbers. They're not that bad. They're going to play weaker teams that aren't going to be able to roll on them. And those numbers are going to come down fast. And that, might help build their confidence a little bit. And just something to keep an eye on there. They're not as bad as they technically look, but they aren't as good as we thought they were.
Yeah, lots to keep an eye on with the Chiefs. And before we can find out more from them on Sunday, we've got a primetime NFC matchup coming our way on Thursday. So we can dig in now to that Thursday night game. Tampa Bay traveling to Philadelphia. BetUS currently having the Bucs as a reduced VIG favorite, -105 attached to that -7 for Tampa Bay. Total at 51.5. And Chris, we've got a history of Brady on short rest. He's been talking about it this week. What do you make of that tight turnaround for Tampa Bay going on the road at that with a short week?
Well, I'm hoping Scott has some ideas on this game because I don't have a lot. uh, you know what you like to hear is when the player comes out Sunday night or Monday and he says, "Yeah, these short week games are rough. They're tough to come back and play." And Brady has a history of not playing well on Thursdays. He openly admitted it's tough to rebound like that. And when you're missing Gronkowski and you've got other cornerback issues and other injury issues, and you have to travel on top of it, that's a big concern. I mean, I'm not going to be looking to lay 7 in that type of a situation. Very interesting stat. The 44-year-old geezer had his first 400-yard game with 5 touchdowns. That's pretty remarkable. So I'm sure it'll take Herbert a couple of weeks to be able to match that the way he's going. But I don't have a lot on this game. Philadelphia is really scrappy. They've got some great offensive metrics that I'm not buying into. Both, Tampa's 0-2 on the road. Philadelphia's 0-2 at home. So somebody's going to go into the win column somehow.
Yeah, Scott, what are you looking for on Thursday night in Philadelphia?
Well, I think the first thing is, remember, Brady's got this hand issue, right? So, I mean, I don't think it's anything that's going to just blow him up and prevent him from playing or anything like that. But we don't know how that's going to impact him. Or do they get a little bit more conservative with their game because they don't want to throw the ball because there is an impact on his hand? So that just bears watching. There's nothing here earth-shattering. I will say this, is the Tampa Bay run defense is very good, and most teams can't or maybe won't even try to run on them. Now, Philly comes at it a little bit differently, obviously with Hurts and his dynamics and whatnot. So it's a little bit of a different, unconventional running game, which we see, there's a few more teams going this way now. So maybe the traditional Tampa Bay run defense doesn't necessarily apply to the Philly run offense, but you could see a little bit more throwing because of that as well. But my numbers, I favor Tampa by about 8, make the number 49.5. Pretty much, kind of right where the number is sitting. This thing did get bet down a little bit on the total yesterday, but there's not enough value on either side for me in this game.
Yeah, I make the line slightly over the 7, but I'm just not buying it. It's not a game that I want to get involved in. It's not even a game I want to tease. Teasers have left a bad taste in my mouth, and I don't need to be laying road teams in teaser situations for some action. So it's a Passerino for me.
Yeah, make that a third pass for me in this one. The number just seems like it's right in this case, so no need to force the issue. I think it's worth keeping an eye on any news we get out of Brady with that thumb injury, especially on a short week like we touched on. On the other side of the ball, Scott, you touched on that injury to Levante David. He's probably not a go for this one. And as a leader in the middle of that Tampa defense, that might be especially impactful to your point about the Eagles' kind of unique run game. So not in a rush to back either team here. I think we can find better spots to invest our money as we get deeper into the Week 6 board on our Friday show. So normally this is when we do a Thursday Night Football pick recap for everybody. This can be pretty quick. We can pull up a graphic on the screen if the production team even bothered to create one, because it's a pass for Chris, it's a pass for me, and it's a pass for Scott. So one thing we can promise, we'll have more action to get into on our Friday show. And on that note, I think we can go ahead and thank everybody for tuning in and joining us today. If you're with us on YouTube, go ahead and give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget, you can sign up at BetUS using the promo code NFL2021 for your 125% sign-up bonus. And guys, while we're talking about BetUS here, gotta wish Natalie on the BetUS team a happy birthday. I think she's finally old enough for that first drink, so go enjoy that tonight, Natalie. Look forward to hearing how it went in our next production meeting. And on that note, everybody, that does it for us, but we're back with you to break down the full weekend slate on Friday. That'll be live at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. We'll see you then, right back here at BetUS, where the game begins.
Happy birthday, Natalie.
Yeah.